Good morning. Welcome to the July 14th, 2020 public hearing, public meeting of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. I will call the roll. Chair Carroll.
Here.
Commissioner Bland.
Here.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Here.
Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chapin.
Was here.
Commissioner Chen.
Yeah.
Commissioner Devonshire. Commissioner Devonshire, you're on mute.
Here.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Here.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here.
Okay.
And then let's go back and ask for about Commissioner Chapin, just to.
Okay. Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
I was trying to get some background noise out from construction on the building.
Got
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone to our public hearing and public meeting of July 14th. Today we will have a designation hearing for a proposed item for designation, which the department will be presenting, and then we will take testimony. Any watch the hearing may do so on our live. Like to participate in the hearing, you can do so by joining the Zoom meeting, and when we're ready to take testimony, we will ask everyone to raise their hands. We do have a sign-in sheet, so we will go in the order of the sign-in sheet to start, and then we will make sure that we've also checked the meeting to see if there are any other people who didn't sign in who are present who'd like to speak. So at that time, we'll ask you to raise your hand. You can also join by phone if you'd like to testify that way without using Zoom, and you can follow along the YouTube live feed and call in when it's time. And after the conclusion of the hearing, we will move to the Preservation Department items. And so we will begin now, and I will turn it over to our Director of Research, Caitlin Mccullough.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. Item number 1 this morning is LP 2645, Harriet and Thomas Truesdale House, 227 Duffield Street in Brooklyn, Block 146, Lot 15. Item proposed for a public hearing is the proposed designation of a Greek Revival style row house constructed circa 1847 to 50 and extended in 1933 that was home to abolitionists Harriet and Thomas Truesdale from 1851 to 63. For more than a decade prior to the Civil War, 227 Duffield Street was the home of Thomas and Harriet Truesdale, documented abolitionists who had moved to Brooklyn in 1839. They owned and lived in 227 Duffield Street from 1851 to 1863, and the property remained in their family until 1921 for a period of 70 years. While a 2-story commercial extension was added in 1933, the house retains its 19th century form and historic fabric above it, and its significant association with the Truesdales and the history of the abolition movement in Brooklyn prior to the Civil War is still legible. The proposed landmark site is Brooklyn Tax Map, Block 146, Lot 15, between Fulton Street and Willoughby Street in downtown Brooklyn. In 1838, Thomas and Harriet Truesdale moved from Providence, Rhode Island to New York City, and in 1839 moved to 14 Hicks Street in Brooklyn Heights, close to Fulton Ferry. Thomas owned an export and import firm on Pearl Street in Manhattan. Both Thomas and Harriet were active in the movement that opposed slavery, and were founders within several anti-slavery organizations that were established during the pre-Civil War years, including the Rhode Island Anti-Slavery Society, the New England Anti-Slavery Society, and the Providence Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. The Truesdales were acquaintances of William Lloyd Garrison, a leading abolitionist during the period, who also worked for women's rights. Garrison's papers include a letter documenting a visit to the Truesdales' home in 1840 when they lived on Hicks Street. This former home, shown by the arrow above this 1884 Sanborn map, was demolished for the construction of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. From 1851 to 63, Thomas and Harriet Truesdell lived in 227 Duffield Street, which is now downtown Brooklyn. The Truesdells continued to support the abolition movement during this time. Records show Thomas Truesdell was associated with the American Anti-Slavery Society from 1853 to 1863 and supported the National Anti-Slavery Standard from 1855 to 1862. The three-story brick row house was built circa 1847 to 50 as part of a row of both wood and brick 2- and 3-story houses with basements and front and rear porches, as seen in the 1855 Paris map on the left, when the house address was 141 Duffield Street. Harriet died in 1862 while living here, and Thomas moved to New Jersey in 1863. The Truesdell family retained the house until 1921, resulting in a 70-year association with the property. The map on the right shows it in 1915, by which time changes to the neighborhood as it developed into Brooklyn's downtown retail and commercial center were evident. Since its time associated with the Truesdells, the house's front and rear porches were removed, and between 1932 and 1933, a 2-story commercial addition was constructed, as you can see here, extending from the front of the building, which involved demolition of the facade behind. A certificate of occupancy from 1933 at the Department of Buildings lists a store and luncheonette within the first 2 floors with apartments above. Above this extension, however, the original 1850s facade, fenestration pattern, window surrounds, and cornice remain. Research staff carefully studied 227 Duffield Street and the Truesdells within the historic context of 19th century abolitionism. This timeline, developed for our interactive story map, New York City and the Path to Freedom, shows some of the milestones leading up to the abolition of slavery nationwide in 1865. In the early 19th century, Brooklyn's economy relied heavily on the storage and export of agricultural products shipped from southern slaveholding states. Yet its waterfront and large population of free African Americans made it a hub for abolitionist activity. This activity took many forms, including membership in anti-slavery organizations, political activism, fundraising, lecturing, writing, and publishing, and involved people across social, religious, and racial spectrums. Brooklyn's busy waterfront was the entry point for many freedom seekers who stowed away on ships to escape slavery in the South. Many were sheltered by Brooklyn abolitionists participating in Underground Railroad networks and either stayed in Brooklyn or traveled north to upstate New York or New England, and many went on to Canada. The Truesdells were active members and supporters of anti-slavery societies and newspapers during their time in Rhode Island and in Brooklyn. They lived at 227 Duffield Street from 1851 until 1863, a time marked by more clandestine abolitionist activity due to the harsh penalties on those who broke the 1850 fugitive slave law. In our study, we identified several individual landmarks and historic districts in Brooklyn that reflect its abolitionist history. The designated houses on Hunterfly Road in Weeksville, for example, embody the history of an early African-American community that was a safe haven for free and enslaved African Americans. The Brooklyn Heights Historic District includes several homes and churches associated with prominent abolitionists like Henry Ward Beecher, James W.C. Pennington, and Lewis Tappan, all shown here. Documenting Underground Railroad activity is difficult given its secret and clandestine nature. Several buildings with documented association to the Underground Railroad have been designated as landmarks, such as Plymouth Church within the Brooklyn Heights Historic District, referred to as the Grand Central Depot of the Underground Railroad in the area, and the First Free Congregational Church on Bridge Street, an individual landmark. Recent verbal accounts of 227 Duffield Street being a stop on the Underground Railroad have not been confirmed after extensive research and physical analysis. However, the building has significance as a rare example of a property associated with the Truesdells, documented abolitionists who resided there for more than a decade, and represents Brooklyn's important legacy of abolitionist activity. These two views show the current condition and urban context of 227 Duffield Street in downtown Brooklyn. While its context has changed dramatically and its lower floors have been altered, the building's form and remaining historic fabric still convey its 19th century residential character and significant association with abolitionist history. The Truesdell House is significant as a rare example of a property associated with the Truesdells, well-documented abolitionists who resided there for more than a decade and owned the property for over 70 years. It represents Brooklyn's important role in the abolition movement before the Civil War, and its remaining 19th century form and historic fabric convey this significance. The research department recommends its designation as an individual landmark. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. This is Mark Silberman, General Counsel. The chair has inadvertently been knocked off the meeting, so she's rejoining. But in the meantime, we can go to begin the public testimony. So Rich Lisa, can you start calling people?
Right.
Yeah.
And just for the record, I am back on the meeting. I joined on my phone, and I'll be also continuing to work on the laptop to see why I can't get on. But I'm here and I am listening to the testimony and anxious to hear everyone who came to participate today.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I just wanted to reiterate what Sarah said earlier in the hearing in terms of testimony, that as always, we call people that signed in first, but we ask everybody that wants to speak to raise their hand, and then we'll work through the list of people that signed up, and then through other people that have their hand raised after that. So I'm going to, and then what I'll do is bring people into the webinar as panelists to speak, and then we'll remove you back to an attendee after that. And if you could just hit unmute, and then if you choose to show your video, have your video camera work, you can do that as well. So I'm going to start with Inez and Charles Barron. I'm promoting you to a panelist. And so I believe this is Assemblyman Charles Barron. If you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
I did.
Hi, we can hear you.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. I can't see myself, so I don't know if you saw me. Should I begin?
Yes, you can begin, please. And if you could state your name for the record, that would be great.
Okay. I'm Assemblyman Charles Barron, and Councilmember Inez Barron will be joining me as well. I want to first say that this hearing is very, very critical and important and timely, especially at a time now where there's been historic social movements and protests, and at a time where revisionism of history is being uncovered, and we showing the true nature of what happened historically around slavery and other kinds of things. And the question of reparations has been on the table and so many other issues. But I'm personally linked to this issue because I remember, I think it was back in 2004 when they tried to demolish these buildings, that we had a hearing in the city council and we successfully stopped the demolition. And I got to give credit to Joy Chattel. We called her affectionately Mama Joy, who made her transition. That this day, I'm sure she would be pleased to know that this was indeed happening. We also refuted the EIS report where they said that there was no scientific evidence of the Underground Railroad passing through there at the house and it not being a safe house. In fact, we had some archaeologists from the Schomburg Library and other places that said otherwise, that there is evidence of that, and that that is indeed a historical place. That whole hub was just fervent with abolitionist activity. 2 blocks away, the Bridge Street AME Church was a home for runaway enslaved Africans, and just the whole area was in that, in fact. So we think that it should definitely be preserved. It's been a long, long fight. I think the landmarks, I used to sit on the committee for public sightings, landmarks, and the committee in the city council. And I, for a long time, and I think the commissioner at that time was grateful enough to actually do what I had requested. Most of the projects that came to the landmarks, public sightings, and maritime use, that was the word I was looking for, committee, they had historical information on these developments, but at the time of slavery in New York, they wouldn't document the indigenous people that were there first on these lands, and then the enslaved Africans who helped develop them weren't a part of the commission's history until we made it an issue years ago, a decade more ago, to say every time that there's a project that comes through, they should include the history of that particular property as it related to the indigenous people and Africans. So I support the landmarking of this. It's long overdue, and I hope we do the right thing in these times that we're in, because these are critical times. Our children need to know history, and any kind of historical preservation that could occur would be very beneficial to having an accurate history of what happened in New York City, which was the second largest slaveholding city in the Union, from I think 1626 when New York became New Amsterdam, and then in 1664, New York City with the Duke of York and the English after the Dutch, and then abolished slavery in 1827, although it continued up to 1840. And a lot of the street names like Skank and Van Sinderen and Van Sicklen in my beloved East New York were slaveholders. Thomas Jefferson, Washington, slaveholders. Most of the early presidents were slaveholders. So we need to really tell our children this history, and what greater way than to preserve this. And I'll let my wife and the council member, Inez Barron, talk now.
Good morning. Good morning. Councilmember
Good
Inez
morning.
Barron here. Good to be on this event. I just want to say that I also currently sit on the Landmarks Committee at City Hall, at City Council. And we're very much concerned that these historical sightings, in fact, be dedicated and preserved. We know, as the Assembly member has said, that that entire area was a hub for the abolitionist movement. There were many meetings that were held in that area. We know that Frederick Douglass himself was a part of the events that took place on Myrtle Avenue and Duffield Street at the meeting houses that were there. And it was also the site of the Fleet Avenue Church, which left from that area and relocated in Bedford-Stuyvesant. But there are several significant Black churches that were there that were the hub. Albee Square and all of that area was a hub, and there was a huge concentration of Blacks who lived in that area. We understand also that it was a hub because there were many African Americans who were able to, through their skills, be involved in the economy of the waterfront. And that was a significant source of the work that was done to build this country, particularly New York City. So we're calling on Landmarks to help preserve this, to help dedicate an area that we know was significant, so that in the days and months and years ahead, the contributions of African Americans will be enshrined in the history with markers, with kinds of monuments that address that. Now, we know it was a big battle when we had the African burial ground to get that preserved and to have a monument erected, talking about the significance of African Americans during that time. And we understand that here's another opportunity for us to address the contributions that were made, to make sure that they are preserved and make sure they're not marginalized or even forgotten by not being significantly and appropriately honored through this landmarking. So we know that the residents of the home have also oftentimes talked about the connections and the tunnels that are underground, and where did they lead to? They weren't just there to just lead to nothing. So we understand that there are others that have not yet fully been documented, but there are so many earmarks of what it is that we understand was important to that time. So we're calling on this, we stand behind that, and we hope that you will take this significant action, particularly now at this time when the city has an opportunity to correct so many of the oversights and injustices that have been institutionalized in the future, to turn that around and make the significant decision. Thank you so much.
Thank you, council member.
Oh, okay, one more time.
Oh, apologies for that. Okay, so next we'll bring in Susan Pascantonio, and representing Assemblymember Joanne Simon. So Susanna, if you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you wish, and please state your name for the record. And I would remind everybody that to please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Susanna, you just, yes, there you go.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, good morning. My name is Susanna Pasquantonio. I am the Chief of Staff for Assemblymember Joanne Simon. Thank you to the Chair and the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And Assemblymember Simon could not be here today. You have her full testimony, I believe, in writing. So I'll just make a brief excerpt from her that is representative of her unique experience at 227 Duffield Street. And I will also say I'm very happy to follow the Barons, because Assemblymember's role in Duffield really builds upon the 2003 Land Use Committee that Assemblymember Barron had referenced. So, and of course, this home embodies the role that people in Brooklyn and the Truesdells played in the abolitionist movement at a time when the Fugitive Slave Act was the law. And so it's very important. We want to echo that we preserve this invaluable piece of our history so future generations can learn about those who fought against racism and slavery. And I'd also like to echo the site is also significant through the work of the last owner, Mama Chattel, who turned 227 Duffield into a political and cultural center. So as we know, the structure is in the heart of downtown Brooklyn, an area visited by millions of people, and the rezoning of downtown Brooklyn has demolished the other buildings on this block, including others to which it was physically linked via tunnels. So Assemblymember Simon was the chair of the Boerum Hill Association's Land Use Committee and the co-convener of the Downtown Brooklyn Coalition's opposition to the city's rezoning for that area in 2003. So the following excerpt that I'm going to read provides her unique perspective on this site. I recall visiting the property and supporting the efforts to learn more about its history and significance. I spent many hours at the time speaking and rallying with Mama Joy and her neighbor, Louis Greenstein, who owned 233 Duffield, to which 227 Duffield was joined by the above referenced tunnel. While my memories of the downtown plan and its passage in June 2004 are vivid, some are more vivid than others. This includes visiting 227 and 223 and seeing the door to the tunnel and the location of the hidey holes where enslaved African Americans could hide from the authorities. As it turns out, the significant history of this location was hidden from the public in 2003 to 2004, but as Assemblymember Barron mentioned, the truth did come out. Opportunities for community voices to be heard during this time of the downtown rezoning were limited to the ULURP process and in connection with the environmental impact statement. I recall clearly that the downtown Brooklyn draft EIS indicated incorrectly that there was no history of Underground Railroad activity at that site, despite its geographic location directly between Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church in Fort Greene and Henry Ward Beecher's Plymouth Church in Brooklyn Heights. Even more stunning was the author's indication and testimony that they had sought advice from the Schomburg Research Center in Black culture, who we were told confirmed there was no such activity. The authors of the EIS suggested that because there were few Black homeowners in that area at the time, Underground Railroad activity was highly unlikely. It had never dawned on them that abolitionists who protected escaping enslaved African Americans were also white people. Riveting city council testimony by the Schomburg Center put paid to this notion, and the center testified that contrary to the EIS, this area was a veritable hotbed of abolitionist history, and the location was very likely to have been part of the Underground Railroad. End quote.
Susanna, okay,
Yes.
Susanna, I'm sorry, you've gone well over. Could you please wrap it up?
Sure. So in closing, designating this structure as a landmark has received significant support from the community. And Assemblymember Simon wants to recognize that this truly was a community-led effort from the beginning, including Circle for Justice Innovations, Fury, Equality for Flatbush, and the Friends of Abolitionist Place. And so the widespread community support is also important to recognize in preserving this building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Nick Smith. And Nick, you just need to unmute yourself, and you can turn on your camera if you choose. Please state your name for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Nick E. Smith, First Deputy Public Advocate, representing our city's public advocate, Jabari Williams, and I will stick to the 3-minute window. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to the LPC for having this hearing in terms of landmarking the house belonging to Harriet and Thomas Truesdale, as Commissioner Mccullough summarized at the top of this hearing. In light of their recent activism against police brutality and racism, it's become clear that much of our country's history is left out of the curriculum that is traditionally learned in school. So it's our responsibility to preserve that history, especially important figures in Black history, like the Truesdales, who so greatly impacted the fight for racial equality. As was mentioned earlier, the Truesdales were well-known abolitionists in New England before moving to Brooklyn. Harriet served on the Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women and treasurer of the Providence Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. Thomas was a founding member of the Rhode Island Anti-Slavery Society. They moved to Brooklyn Heights in 1838 and then to Duffield in 1851, where their abolitionist work continued. Interestingly enough, there have been many accounts of Duffield Street being a site where stops on the Underground Railroad were located. One stop in particular, their home. Advocates have said that a previous owner of the property would bring children into the underground tunnels that connected the homes on the block to show the historical significance of not only the house, but the block. But here we're talking about the individual home. Unfortunately, the property has yet to be landmarked, and we're happy that this hearing is happening today. Last year, the public advocate signed a letter of support for the designation after being contacted by many advocates. We must acknowledge the work of George Attell and that of Fury to preserve this history. June of last year, EDC announced an expansion of Willoughby Square between Duffield and Gold, and hiring artists to stand up a memorial. Memorial is great, but that's not enough. We must landmark this property. And I'll just wrap up by saying this. There is some precedent for these movements, particularly in the national scope. In recent years, the public advocate himself led a successful effort with his council colleagues to stand up a marker at Water and Wall Street, where Black people were bought and sold in open air. It's critical upon the LPC and upon all of us, regardless of our backgrounds, to preserve this history, and we strongly support the designation of a landmark for this historic home. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, next we have Garfield Heslop. Okay, Garfield Heslop, you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And if you could please state your name for the record.
My name is Garfield Heslop, and I'm counsel to the current owners of 227 Duffield Street. And the current owners I should add, consists of a partnership. And I know that a lot has been made, a lot has been mentioned of Joy Chattel, but the current owners consist of a partnership. It's a joint venture between Joyce Chattel, daughter, and the co-tenant of the property, which is a corporation, 227 Duffield, which is owned by Samuel Hanesab. And no one is more attuned to the historical significance of the building as we are as owners of the property. And when my clients, the corporate entity, first purchased the building, it is with that in mind as well. Because part of the development of the property was the creation of a museum that would honor the legacy of the building, that would honor the Trudeau's in building the museum, because a museum was there before, but the building is not viable as a standalone entity. And that is why we decided that in order to preserve the history of the building, in order to make it a viable entity where people, the public, the general public, can enjoy the legacy of the building, part of the development plan was to create that museum. And much has been made, much has been said of the Underground Railroad. Now, in 2007, this very commission, the prior chair of this very commission, was called upon to consider landmarking the building. And at that time, he roundly rejected it. And I'm speaking of Robert Tierney. And Mr. Tierney roundly rejected it and suggested that it would be better served, the memory of the property would be better served by constructing a plaque on the property to commemorate its use as the residence of the abolitionists. Now, we have no problem in going further. We're willing not only to place a plaque, but we're willing to create an entire museum. And in fact, it is financially infeasible for the building to remain as it is if it's landmarked, which is what will occur. Not to mention, by the way, that if the property is landmarked, my clients have already invested $3 million in the property. And there is a current mortgage on the property, and the mortgagee has already asserted that if the property is landmarked, that the value would be decimated and the property would be not viable as an ongoing commercial concern. And so that would effectively bankrupt my client. And recall that my client is a joint venture. So not only would my Mr. Hanesab, who is a very small developer who depends on this for his livelihood. And by the way, he has a newborn child that he's taken care of now. But not only would that decimate his livelihood, because we were so vested in this project, but it would also completely eviscerate the intent and purpose, one of the greatest intent and purpose of the development project, which was to uphold and to perpetuate the same heritage and history of the building that everyone has spoken of here. And of course, all due respect is accorded to all the prior speakers, including the first deputy public advocate, who I admire greatly, as well as the prior assemblywoman. However, as well as the barons. However, I believe, and we believe, that the supporters are somewhat misguided, because if they want to preserve the history and the ambience and the heritage of the property, then the best way to do so is to allow the creation of the museum at the property, where people can actually go and interact with the space. Because if the building is landmarked, it cannot be developed. It cannot be a viable commercial project, and no developer would purchase the building for development purposes. And it is very important to note that if the building is landmarked, the commission neither the commission nor the city can force any owner to allow the public into the space. And so all the talk about the Underground Railroad, and I commend the first deputy public advocate for speaking of the children that would go to the building and go downstairs, etc., to get that experience. Well, that would be gone. That would be eviscerated, because, and again, we wholeheartedly agree with former Chair Tierney, that said that the best way to uphold this, and we'll go even further than he did, which is not only a plaque, but an actual museum. No one would necessarily come to the space if it's simply landmark, because the space, the property has been there for years, abandoned and decaying. And apart from those who are specifically attuned to the history of this building, who may or may not pass by there, no one has made anything definitive insofar as trying to preserve the building for that purpose. We have undertaken that objective, and we are.
I'm sorry, but could you please try and start to wrap up your comments?
Okay. Yes, and we are especially aware of the times that we're in, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the reflection on our history and the African American history and role in the development of the United States. And we believe that the best way to do so would be to allow the property to be developed, to allow the creation of the museum, and to allow us to indeed uphold and honor the history and the heritage of the building in so doing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'm bringing in New York Attorney General Letitia James.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi. Good. We can hear you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to testify. As you know, I've been involved in this effort to preserve 227 Duffield Street, but is actually known as 227 Abolitionist Place. As the former city council member and as someone who was very supportive of Mama Joy, and as a lifelong resident of Brooklyn, as you know, this building was home to two prominent abolitionists, Harriet and Thomas Truesdale. And as has been mentioned by several elected officials, this downtown Brooklyn has been a hub of activity for abolitionists and for the protection of African Americans. It is critical that Landmarks Preservation Commission preserve 227 Abolitionist Place so that its place in history can be rightfully recognized, particularly during this time of national reckoning over the legacy of slavery and the continued injustice faced by African Americans. As luxury developments and sky-high towers crop up all over downtown Brooklyn, it is our responsibility as New Yorkers to ensure we do not build over this important piece of the past. We already have a plaque. The plaque is known as Abolitionist Place. What we need to do is preserve our history and to do it consistent with the vision of Mama Joy. The courage, the sacrifices, and achievements of Mama Joy in the name of equal rights must be preserved and celebrated at a time when Americans everywhere are questioning the preservation of statues and monuments of slave traffickers and Confederate generals and others whose actions placed them squarely on the wrong side of history. 227 Abolitionist Place stands out as the type of monument we should honor and preserve, and from which our children should learn about our history. The former chair of the Landmarks Preservation Commission was wrong, and unfortunately, politics played a large role. I support the efforts of this commission. I also denounce the efforts of the former administration, which indicated that, in fact, there was no history in and around downtown Brooklyn related to the efforts of abolitionists and Quakers and standing up for slaves and for African Americans. I dispute it. It was disputed at the hearing. It was disputed then. It's disputed now. And I'm glad that the commission is now recognizing the role that 227 Abolitionist Place and all of downtown Brooklyn plays in the history of Brooklyn and in the history of Americans and African Americans. I've fought to protect 227 Abolitionist Place since my time as a city council and will continue the fight until it is no longer in jeopardy. I urge the Landmarks Preservation Commission to take seriously its responsibility to safeguard history, to safeguard historical sites, and to approve the preservation of this home. To do so is to stand on the right side of history, both for our ancestors and for our future generations. And I thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. Okay, next I'm calling Evelyn Collier. Okay, Evelyn, you just have to unmute yourself, turn on your camera if you choose. Evelyn Collier, we've got you in. If you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Okay, I think Evelyn is not here.
I'm here.
Oh, you are, okay.
Okay. Good morning. I didn't think I was gonna make the cut. So good morning, Commissioner and all the commissioners that are here today. I wanna thank you for allowing me a chance to get in to speak for the Community Board 3, which I'm the chair of the Landmarks Committee. This is very important to our community, although this is not our district, but it's part of African American history. This historic two-story red brick house is where abolitionists Thomas and Harriet Truesdale lived 1851 to 1863. And according to the documentation, they had a lot of support and good friends. William Lloyd Garrison and the Abolitionists is a newspaper who frequent this residence, the Truesdale home, 227 Duffield Street. This is the last surviving pre-Civil War important abolitionist home. It is very surely needed to be saved from being destroyed by the developers or the city of New York. This building should be preserved as an individual landmark. Preservation of the last standing building would be a part of African-American continuous legacy. Securing African-American historical sites in Brooklyn reflective of such a vital and significant period of time. The community at large and many others across the borough of Brooklyn and beyond stands and believe that this house was used as part of the Underground Railroad, which helps runaway slaves have a place of safety. They believe that this Underground Railroad stop was used as a safe haven so that the abolitionists could help the slaves travel north to Canada. The CB3 Landmark and Preservation Committee supports the many advocacy groups such as Historic District Council, Basquiat Vaughn Organization, the Circle of Justice Invocation, Michael Higgins Jr., others, and organizers and the Family United of Racial and Economic Equality. We support the council members and all the other advocacy who some have spoken already and who stood for this for a very long time. We support the original owner, Mama Joyce, who fought for to keep this place from being from demolition. And Duffield Street between Fulton and Willoughby Street is currently dubbed as the city abolitionist place to honor those who once shepherded slaves through the Underground Railroad. The oral history documentation gathered by the city in 2007 included stories of escaped slaves who sought refuge there in the tunnels that still exist. The freedom seekers would look for kerosene lamp placed in the back windows to let them know that they were welcome and this was the safe house. The previous owner, Joyce Chattel, fought to save the property from eminent domain for many years before her death in 2014. This would be a wonderful thing if this kept landmark today. She felt very strong and passionate about the building, and she wanted to make this building a historic abolitionist museum. She learned from the stories told to her that this was a very significant house, a significant place where our ancestors walked through the tunnels and stood on the floors and touched the walls of the house. From the documentation of Bridge Street AMN, church participation and other noted buildings were demolished, Joyce Chattel and the many advocates believe that 227 Duffield was definitely used as part of the Underground Railroad. The Community Board 3.
And so your 3 minutes are up. Could you please wrap up?
Yes. Community Board 3 supports this project. We hope that our input serve as a catalyst to help save this building for demolition. We believe that this should be designation and not desecration for 227 Duffield Street in Brooklyn. Thank you. Evelyn Collier, Chairperson, Anthony Abuser as Vice Chair, CB3 Landmark and Preservation Committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, Jabari Bridgeport. Okay, Jabari, I brought you in. You just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
So I'd like to say a quick good morning to everyone. I would like to, thank the Landmarks Preservation Commission for holding this hearing. I think it's extremely important. And my comments will be brief because I know, we're running a little bit late and sorry about that. But I wanted to, again, thank you for holding this meeting, express my extreme preference that this is made into a landmark. We're living at a time where we are seeing a national debate over, what we preserve and what we don't, with the taking down of Confederate statues across the country and the true debate over what exactly we want to commemorate. And we have a real opportunity with this building to commemorate a site of struggle, of hope, of optimism for truly Black freedom and for Black civil rights. And I think it's incredibly important in this moment to honor that and ensure that we have a testament and a monument to Black history right here in Brooklyn for an incredibly valuable piece of our history. So I want to thank you again for hosting this meeting and encourage you to vote on making this a historical site. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next, Andrea Goldwyn. Andrea, you just need to unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and state your name for the record.
Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. I'm Andrea Goldwyn, speaking on behalf of the New York Landmarks Conservancy. The Conservancy is pleased to join with elected officials, neighbors, and advocates to support designation of the Harriet and Thomas Truesdell House as an individual landmark. The Truesdell House merits designation for its history as the residence of abolitionists Harriet and Thomas Truesdell. Despite alterations and additions, this mid-19th century Greek Revival building maintains its original height, scale, configuration, materials, and many decorative details. It has clear connections to the pre-Civil War era when the Truesdells first occupied it. There has been some question whether the house was part of the Underground Railroad, and of course, by the inherently secretive nature of this activity, physical evidence would be hard to document. However, the association with the Truesdells makes the strongest case for designation. In fact, the scarcity of extant sites connected with abolitionist history makes designations such as this one all the more compelling. The Landmarks Law calls on the LPC to safeguard the places that represent New York City's cultural, social, economic, political, and architectural history for multiple reasons, including the fostering of civic pride and promoting the education of New Yorkers. Designation of the Truesdell House will fulfill that mandate. The house is one of the few remaining that can be definitively associated with New York's abolitionist movement. It has been nearly lost to demolition several times. There should be no delay in ensuring that it is protected and honored. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Conservancy's views.
Thank you very much. Next, Kelly Carroll, Historic Districts Council.
Good morning, Kelly Carroll, Historic Districts Council. The Historic Districts Council has long been concerned about the permanent preservation of the Harriet and Thomas Truesdell House at 227 Duffield Street in downtown Brooklyn. The house, dating from the mid-19th century, was home to the Truesdells from 1851 to 1863 and is the home where Harriet died in 1862. The Truesdells were intimately involved in the American abolitionist movement, befriending such luminaries as Ralph Waldo Emerson and William Lord Garrison. The Truesdells were associated with this house until the 1920s. Although the building has seen substantial alterations since Harriet and Thomas Truesdell's residency, the essential truth of the house is still very evident. Visually, this is obviously a home of the mid-19th century. It is one of the few such remaining houses in the area and the only one left on this block after the devastation wrought by the 2004 rezoning. During that action, the history of this building was deeply researched. While its physical connection with Underground Railroad activities was inconclusive, its association with the Truesdells and the abolitionist movement is unequivocal. This house is the last remaining connection to the dedicated abolitionist community active in the area in the mid-19th century. As such, it provides important context to the handful of other known abolitionist sites of conscience in Brooklyn, such as Plymouth Church of the Pilgrims, by expanding the record to include domestic buildings as well as institutional and religious structures. It was not an accident that Henry Ward Beecher became more radicalized and fervent about abolitionism while serving as pastor in Plymouth Church. The community was fertile ground for the cause, and placing the Truesdells within that history gives us a better perspective of the time and helps correct the fallacious impulse to ascribe one of the most important human rights movements in American history to the great man theory. It has been estimated that in 1790, 1/3 of Brooklyn's population were of African origin, the vast majority of whom were enslaved. In 1834, 7 years after slavery in New York State ended and the year the city of Brooklyn was incorporated, an anti-abolition riot in Manhattan led many abolitionists to consider moving to Brooklyn. The village of Weeksville, established in 1838 by freed Blacks, began to thrive, and the village of Williamsburg became a destination as well. The history of slavery in Brooklyn and New York is a field which is still very much emerging. More research needs to be done and more information needs to be incorporated into the accepted canon of history. As preservationists and historians, we should be doing everything possible to save and record the stories, records, and artifacts of that time before they are lost. As much of early American life took place in the domestic realm, especially the organizing and formulation of controversial reform movements such as abolitionism, the designation of a site of conscience such as 227 Duffield Street as an individual New York City landmark would grant protection to a building which would only grow in importance and significance as our understanding of history expands. We applaud the Landmarks Preservation Commission for bringing forward this important site for consideration before it is lost for all time. HDC urges the commission to designate 227 Duffield Street so that future New Yorkers will not forget our city's complex history. Thank you.
Lisa, you're on mute.
Lisa may
I'm
have,
sorry, Chris. Sorry, I was on mute. Christabel Goff, I brought you in. If you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose. Christabel, I can also unmute you potentially. Christabel, I see you're unmuted. Okay, Christabel, one more time. We can come back to you if you're not ready at this time. Okay, let's move to Joan Geismar. Okay, Joan, I'm promoting you to a panelist. You just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Okay, there I am. You did it. Thank you, Lisa.
Sure. If you could just state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Joan Geismar, and I'm representing PANIC, Professional Archaeologists of New York City, but this has nothing to do with archaeology. I'd just like to read our testimony. On behalf of Professional Archaeologists of New York City, PANIC, I write to urge the Commission to designate 227 Duffield Street a New York City cultural landmark. As the only surviving building on this Brooklyn street and block with known association with the 19th century abolition movement, it deserves recognition and protection of its historical and cultural past. This clearly could include serving as a safe place along the Underground Railroad. Beyond that, the building serves as a reminder of the role those who lived on this Brooklyn block and in this building played in American history. It also validates the street's current name, Abolitionist Place. Its protection would afford the opportunity to become a cultural institution that commemorates an extraordinary historical past. Without question, the building's cultural and historical significance, as well as its unique position as the lone survivor of an important historical movement, contrasted with its seeming ordinariness, is worthy of the protection and recognition landmark status would provide. The time is absolutely right to make this happen. I thank you for letting me testify, and it wasn't about archaeology this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joan. Next, Tricia Ben Davies. Tricia, you just brought you in as a panelist. Okay, you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Thank you.
And if you could just state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes, please.
My name is Tricia Olanka Ben Davies. I want to start by giving thanks to my guides and ancestors and the Divine Mother who loves me unconditionally. I'm a volunteer with Equality for Flatbush, and practitioner with Makeup Brooklyn. Excuse me. I honor and acknowledge the land on which 227 Duffield Street sits. It is Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land of the Lenape and Canarsie people, who, due to centuries of colonialism perpetuated by genocide, forced displacement, and systemic oppression, are now scattered throughout the United States and Canada. I'm first generation African American with direct roots in Sierra Leone. Both of my parents are from Freetown, which was founded by the descendants of enslaved people. My knowledge of my family's history begins with my great-great-grandparents, but I don't know who they were before they became Creole. I know that my people came through abolitionist place. I feel tingles in my feet and in my spine, which lengthens when I stand at 227 Duffield Street. And that's just from standing on the sidewalk. As much as I love books, in circumstances like these, they'll never be enough. A plaque will never be enough. I'm here because 227 Duffield Street is the only one left. I'm here because my people are scattered throughout the United States, Canada, Africa, the Caribbean, and elsewhere. I'm here because there's no home without history. I'm grateful that 227 Duffield Street is still standing. I'm grateful to Mama Joy and all those who came before us, who shouted and marched and fought to deliver us to this moment. Landmarking 227 Duffield Street could be the first step in the city of New York taking responsibility and bringing a bit of peace to our community that has been systemically attacked through gentrification, police violence, which are direct attacks on Black lives and Black identities. My sister, Breonna Taylor, was killed by a police raid connected to a political plan to develop real estate development in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm here because I want justice, I want peace, and I want home. This is about community.
Your 3 minutes are up. Could you please wrap up?
I'm complete. Thank you.
Oh, you're done. Okay, great. Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. And next, I'm bringing in Elizabeth Adams. Okay, Elizabeth, should just be able to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose. And if you could state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Adams. I am the legislative director for Councilmember Stephen Levin, the council member for the 33rd District of Brooklyn, New York. So on behalf of Councilmember Steve Levin, I just want to share today that the council member strongly supports the landmarking and preservation of 227 Duffield Street, also known as Abolitionist Place. Today's conversation and the discussion comes after years of a fight to preserve and protect 227 Duffield Street. This fight has been led by Black women in Brooklyn, and it's important that we honor their history, led by Mama Joy Chattel and the organizations and community members who are continuing the work today. 227 Duffield Street has been long connected to cultural work at a time when slavery was acceptable or considered acceptable in the US. And it played a key role in in support in housing and supporting abolitionists in Brooklyn. It's important more than ever that we honor Brooklyn's legacy in the abolitionist movement, and that we preserve physical spaces that play a role in that history. At a moment when it's more important than ever that we remember our history and that we protect spaces as landmarks. 227 Duffield Street is a critical part of that. There have been a number of documents and reports from historians, from people who have looked through the city records and found overwhelming evidence of abolitionist activity on the block. To the person who said earlier about landmarking it doesn't necessarily equate preserving it in the way that it should be with a museum. I think the council member would like to see both. We would like to see it landmarked, and then also the investment put into the space to make sure that the building itself is preserved and able to honor with the museum, so that people can visit the space, so people can learn the history. All of that is important to happen together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Sabine Aronofsky. So Sabine, you just need to unmute yourself. Yeah, and turn on your camera.
Hi. Good morning.
You state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, good morning. This is Sabine Aronofsky. Sorry, I have a picture of my daughter there. So I just want, I'm with Fifth Avenue Committee. I'm also a local resident. I'm was a videographer who met Mama Joy Chattel, who is an activist with Fury, Families United for Racial and Economic Equality. And we did several videos where we actually have seen the inside of 227 Duffield Street. And I think the oral history is incredibly important here. And Joy was able to tell that story as it was passed on to her. And we were able to see some of the interior of the building, the sub-basements, where it was clear there were connecting passages from on the block. I don't know how much of that remains or not at this time, since there's been so much construction, but we do have video. I did submit that with my testimony. So I encourage the commission to look at that if you have not yet. And the AKRF study did, even though it did talk about the social value of this place, and I just really encourage the commission to consider landmarking from that perspective of how important this is to the oral history and tradition of all the African Americans that came through here and were in this community, and those connections and how important it is to preserve it from that perspective. I'll give the rest of my time back unless there's a question.
No, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Okay, so the next person we will call is Imani Henry. And I am promoting you to a panelist. You just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose. Imani Henry, please unmute yourself. Okay.
Hello.
Imani Henry last time. Okay.
Yes, here.
Okay, please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, Imani Henry, Equality for Flatbush. I don't want to talk too long. I think the piece of it that is very important to us as an anti-gentrification, affordable housing group, working to stop the displacement of low to middle income New Yorkers, is that 227 Duffield, on a political level, is a perfect example of how gentrification impacts our communities. That it's not just homes and small businesses, but it's also institutions that we love. That we're also fighting for the Black Lady Theater. Multiple churches, Black churches, brown churches, have also lost leases. And so we want to really talk about the fact that gentrification, particularly of the downtown area, is devastating our community. As many people have already mentioned, right now we're in a global pandemic, and as well as in a global moment of rebellion, frankly, where Confederate and colonial, statues, institutions are being burned to the ground, are being brought down. Here is a symbol of freedom and abolition of slavery. This is a moment to be clear that this building is the epitome of the Black Lives Matter struggle. And particularly, one of the things that have been very important in this mobilization to save 227 Duffield has been the young people, frankly, the children that have been part of this struggle, who have cried at that building, who referred to it as Freedom House, who cannot believe, and I get emotional, that something so precious to our community, something so precious to Brooklyn, precious to New York, would be taken away from them without their consent, without their permission. And with that spirit, we are definitely asking for the commission to do the right thing, make this a landmark, that generations of Black and brown and white, of all nationalities, of children, of people, can visit this as a museum, can be a part of this legacy in history, can feel this sense of victory against white supremacy, slavery, and anti-Black racism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, we appreciate it. So Raul Rosblat, excuse me. Raul, if you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Okay. Yep. Hold on a sec. All right, can you see me?
Yeah, and please just state your name for the record and use 3 minutes.
My name is Raul Rothblatt. I want to thank the LPC for holding this hearing. I would like to talk about which movements are worth saving at 227 Duffield. Downtown Brooklyn was the heart of many social movements. Most of the important African-American churches in Brooklyn started there, including Concord Baptist Church and Fleet Street Methodists. And almost all have been demolished without a trace. Only Bridge Street AME remains, which is now Wunsch Hall and Metrotech and is not open to the public. Brooklyn was home to the first African-American women's suffrage club. The Women's Loyal Union was founded in 1888. There is no marker to celebrate this. Weeksville is an iconic center for African-American freedom, but its founders were from downtown Brooklyn. Sylvana Smith, one of the original investors, lived at what is now the Brooklyn Marriott. Nothing marks his former home. W.E.B. Du Bois praised the Lincoln Settlement as one of the most important sites of the country. Located at 106 Fleet Place, it was home of the NAACP and the Urban League. The building was demolished without a trace. Abolitionist Augustus Stores was so important, there's a town in Connecticut named after him. His home on Duffield Street has been obliterated without a trace. According to Clarence Taylor, some of the most important organizations within Hold on a second. According to Clarence Taylor, some of the most important organizations within the Black churches were literary societies. The Brooklyn Literary Union met on Duffield and Willoughby, but there is nothing to recognize this history. Yet 227 Duffield stands. Why? In large part because of the activism of Joy Monroe, known as Mama Joy. Back when this was a big story in 2007, 5 connected abolitionist-era homes stood next to hers. There is strong physical evidence of Underground Railroad activity at 231 and 233 Duffield, but they were demolished without a trace. Because of Mama Joy, people like Congressman Hakeem Jeffries and Attorney General Letitia James gathered on Duffield. Mama Joy was integral to several groups. She was on the board of Families United for Racial and Economic Equality, an anti-gentrification group. She was also active with Develop, Don't Destroy, and the Prospect Park Drum Circle. Her home was a rehearsal studio for the family's amazing African music ensemble. Her image as an ancestor is shared at countless Brooklyn dance performances. Her hair salon transformed the hair of Sandra Diavalar, the executive director of half the public school students in Brooklyn. She treated me as a son. Her compassion is why I am here right now. A social movement is great, not just because it's listed in the paper. It's important because it is full of love. And that love is so palpable that the elected officials try to brighten themselves with its glow. That's why Mama Joy is important. That's why her legacy must be protected along with the Truesdales. I believe her history should be included in the LPC designation of 227 Duffield. And I would like
Thank
to,
you.
one quick.
Okay, your time is up. Could you just wrap up?
Yes, one quick retort. The new owners have never reached out to any of the historical advocates. They've never shown any interest in the history. We have a vibrant community of people willing to save this history, and they have not shown any interest in that. And I think those actions should also be recognized that, as far as I can tell, they've had contempt, I would say, of the history, if I judge their actions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next is Lincoln Ressler. So Lincoln, you just need to, yes, great, unmute yourself. And if you could state your name for the record, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Lincoln Ressler. Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the LPC commissioners. I'm a Brooklyn Heights native. This hearing is both timely and overdue. We've been fighting for the preservation of this vital site on the Underground Railroad for decades. And I'm so pleased that we finally have an opportunity to preserve it once and for all, thanks to the leadership of so many notable community advocates and to the partnership with the LPC. For generations, downtown Brooklyn was the primary hub of the African-American and Caribbean American communities in Brooklyn. 227 Duffield has all the markers of an Underground Railroad site, surrounded by Black churches like Bridge Street AME and Concord Baptist, abolitionist associations and notable anti-slavery leaders, a Quaker meeting house, proximity to transportation, both ports and railroads, and a strong oral tradition. Plymouth Church, the Grand Central Depot of the Underground Railroad, is also nearby. Slightly less importantly, that's where I had my bar mitzvah. Despite the challenges of documenting precise locations of the Underground Railroad, we know the history well of John Duffield, the Truesdales, William Hardin, and other renowned abolitionists who lived on this block. Indeed, relating to 227 Duffield in particular, there's a map from 1898 indicating the existence of a tunnel between buildings along Duffield Street. The oral history is also powerful. The Truesdale family controlled the home until 1921. The family of the husband of Joy Chattel, the home from them. This is a clear, direct. Joy Chattel made it her life's work for our city to memorialize this building's contribution to freedom. Mama Joy invited me into her home multiple times. She showed me the trap, the exit shafts, the covered walls, subcellar features, and other architectural anomalies indicating a connection to the Underground Railroad. I want to thank the tremendous advocates who have helped push this designation forward. To Fury, Equality for Flatbush, Circle for Justice, Raoul, who just spoke, Michael Higgins, and so many more. Black Lives Matter, Black Landmarks Matter, Black History Matters. We must lift up these sites, these stories, these artifacts that promote social justice thank you to the LPC and hope that you'll consider the landmark designation.
Okay, thank you very much. Next will be David Mulkins, followed by Daniel Mccallum. Oops. David Mulkins, I've promoted you to a panelist. Sorry, David Mulkins, now you should be panelist. So David, if you could just unmute yourself, turn on your camera if you choose. David Mulkins, just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Hi.
Hi, we can hear you. If you could state your name for the record, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, David Mulkins, Bowery Alliance of Neighbors President and 25-year public high school history teacher. The anger expressed in the recent toppling of statues is not just because of their association with slavery and racism, but also because there are so few statues and landmarks commemorating the lives, struggles, and contributions of African Americans who have endured hundreds of years of slavery, post-Civil War years of segregation and terror, and 50 post-civil rights era years of systemic racism. Blacks have enriched America economically as well as culturally. Their lives and struggles need to be honored as a part of our streetscape. We thus urge you to landmark the Harriet and Thomas Truesdale House at 227 Duffield Street, a site that was deeply involved in the often dangerous fight against slavery. While co-naming Duffield Street Abolitionist Place celebrates its past, preserving its 1850 Greek Revival style Truesdale House is crucial to that street's sense of place, sense of historic place. Dr. Cheryl Laroche calls it the most exciting location of the Underground Railroad research in this country. The Truesdale House also witnessed the feminist activity of Harriet Truesdale, who attended the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, which launched the women's movement. The nurturing legacy of 227 Duffield continued into more recent times when Mama Joy Chattel opened its doors to anybody needing a home and turned the humble structure into a rehearsal space, hair salon, and Black Pride center of political and cultural ferment. A past administration tried to bulldoze this building through eminent domain. We hope that the LPC action will help to save it. As we wrestle with the legacy of racism and attempt to forge a more inclusive look at our city's heritage, we urge the LPC to landmark the Truesdale House. Given the city's paucity of African American historical sites, a designation honoring the long emancipation struggle would be profoundly appropriate. We also hope that the LPC will consider the well-preserved federal era houses at 134 and 136 Bowery, which also have remarkable ties to the abolitionist movement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Next, Daniel Mccullough, followed by, we're going to try again with Christabel Gall. Daniel Mccullough. Just need to unmute yourself, turn on your camera if you choose. Daniel Mccullough, you just need to unmute yourself. Daniel Mccullough, we're going to have to move you back if you aren't able to do this. Okay, Daniel, we'll try you again. Christabel Goff. Christabel, I'm going to try this a different way. You should be able to speak now. Christabel, I think you should be able to speak now. Christabel? Okay. Okay. Let's move to Brad Vogel. Brad, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. And you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Wonderful.
Great. And please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, my name is Brad Vogel, and I'm here on my own behalf today. I strongly support designation of the Abolitionist House at 227 Duffield Street as an individual city landmark. The structure should be designated irrespective of whether or not the mayor or his wife have asked the commission, an independent agency, to designate. It should be designated irrespective of the compelling social times we find ourselves in. It should be designated irrespective of the alterations that have been made to the building. It should be designated irrespective of whether Harriet and Thomas Truesdell would recognize the house today. 227 Duffield Street should be designated because its cultural significance as a site related to historical efforts to abolish slavery falls squarely within the existing rationales for designation under the city's landmarks law. Comparing it against the text of the law makes that clear, and commissioners can read what I wrote in my submitted testimony. But what would the implications be if the commission rejected 227 Duffield, given the designation is sought here based on cultural and historical significance? If the commission read the landmarks law too rigidly, it would shut the door on a host of underrepresented ethnic, racial, sexual, artistic, occupational, and other subcultures that make up many strands of the city's history. These subcultures' histories are embedded in structures and sites that are, often because of minority or outsider status or official discriminatory policies, less architecturally significant than traditional commission fare, or less likely to be maintained in pristine condition over time. With the humble Stonewall Inn and James Baldwin's residence on the Upper West Side, the commission moved forward in laudable ways. If the commission is going to square up to its duty to grow designations in the realm of cultural landmarks, it is going to need to accept and even learn to value the accretive and accumulative changes that are inevitable with many of these sites over time, like with the Leaves of Grass House, Walt Whitman's former residence in Brooklyn. It's time to start seeing the additional stories embedded in those physical changes, stories that help to better flesh out the grand, complicated, imperfect tableau that is New York City. Again, I support designation of 227 Duffield Street, and I hope its designation heralds the start of a slip down a long overdue slope toward official recognition and protection for a wider swath of culturally important sites in a city increasingly overrun with buildings that are boundlessly blasé. As Brooklyn learns more about the enslaved people in its own past, it should have this tangible touchstone to learn about the efforts to fight slavery as well. Kudos to Mama Joy Chettel, Raoul Rothblatt, Michael Higgins Jr., and the many other friends of 227 Duffield who have kept this cause alive over the years and who have made it clear that Black landmarks matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Michael Hagen. Michael Higgins, you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
All right, thank you, everyone. Good morning to members of the Landmark Preservation Commission, elected officials, and members of the general public. My name is Michael Higgins Jr., and I'm a member of the Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network, who's been working as part of the Save 227 Duffield campaign for the last year. I'm also a former employee of Families United for Racial and Economic Equality, also known as FURY, where one of the former owners of the site, the late Mama Joy Chattel, served as a member of its board of directors. The Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network supports the decision of the Landmark Preservation Commission to consider 227 Duffield as a candidate for landmark preservation. We agree with the June 30th vote by the commissioners that its social significance is profoundly important and should be saved despite alterations to the original building. We also want to acknowledge the efforts of groups such as Equality for Flatbush and Circle for Justice Innovations, who have organized numerous direct actions on Abolitionist Place and in front of the offices of the Commission on Center Street to get us to this point. We say that not to shame, but rather to highlight the importance of social movements in the creation and reproduction of the work of New York City's most prominent preservation institutions, including the Commission itself. It is also the role that the site played within a social movement against the evils of American chattel slavery that we hope to consider and have be considered by this Commission. Our network of nonprofit organizations, non-funded groups, tenant unions, and police accountability projects recognize our work against gentrification as part of a struggle to oppose government and private actions to diminish, obfuscate, and erase both working class communities, but also co-opt power built by these communities to practice self-determination. In the context of downtown Brooklyn, this has unfortunately happened multiple times, including most recently with the downtown Brooklyn rezoning. Before the approval of the rezoning in 2004, Duffield Street was home to a number of buildings formerly owned by people who used their homes to support enslaved peoples escaping for freedom, and current day owners that openly spoke and celebrated this history to anyone willing to listen, including Mama Joy and Louis Greenstein, the former owner of 233 Duffield Street. Despite this history, the Bloomberg administration ignored repeated attempts by these owners and other preservation advocates to examine potential connections to these buildings to the Underground Railroad in good faith. Instead, the city tried to demolish this home through eminent domain to be incorporated into what is now known, quite ironically, as Abolitionist Place Park. In 2007, the LPC had the opportunity to advocate for additional research into the physical history of 227 Duffield and adjacent properties, the life stories of the Truesdales, and efforts of their so-called activists. The commission chose to do nothing, and we as the general public lost most of the buildings in question to development that has turned the street into just another corner of downtown Brooklyn, taken over by high-rise development and chain hotels. We lost treasures that turned the metaphorical tracks and stops on the Underground Railroad into a living and breathing structure to be experienced up close. The significance of 227 Duffield lies in it being connected to a whole network of buildings and institutions, which include more prominently known sites as the Plymouth Church, the former site of the Bridge Street AWME Church, and the remains of the Weeksville settlement. Today, the LPC has the power to make right a mistake it had helped create on the site, and it had allowed for this site to be on the brink of demolition mere weeks ago and permanently destroy the dream of Mama Joy Chattel to transform this site into a museum. The Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network knows all too well that gentrification is not merely the result of market forces and individual actors, but also the state and civic institutions that turn a blind eye to the harm of dispossessing communities of their homes and connection to land and history. We hope the commission votes in favor of the landmarking of 227 Duffield and honors the lives of the Truesdales and Mama Joy in their future words and actions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The next three speakers I'm going to call are Jacob Morris, Linda Nat Mullen, and Todd Fine. So first is Jacob Morris. I'm going to bring you in as a panelist. You just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose. Okay, Jacob Morris, please unmute yourself. Jacob Morris. If you could please unmute yourself. Okay, Jacob, I think we'll have to try again with you a little bit later. Next two speakers, Linda Nat Mullen, and followed by Todd Fine. So Linda, I'm promoting you to a panelist. And if you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Can you see me?
Great.
Here I am.
Yes.
Hello, Madam Chairman.
Please state your name. Okay.
Oh, my name is
Go
Linda
ahead.
Mullen. I am on the History and Library Committee of the Brooklyn Monthly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers. We have been in downtown Brooklyn since 1835. For too long, the popular Underground Railroad myth has been that white people, particularly Quakers, handed off Black escapees like so many parcels. Not so. Quaker historian Christopher Densmore says, I suspect that much of that 20th century mythology was perhaps unconsciously white Americans trying to convince themselves that in times of slavery, they had all been on the side of freedom. As is coming to light, the fact that white and Black people work together on anti-slavery issues is important. The fact that Black people took matters into their own hands, started their own committees of vigilance to protect free Black people and help freedom seekers is important, and it is not widely known. A few examples. Louis Napoleon is a Black Underground Railroad conductor who was based in Brooklyn, who saved approximately 3,000 people. He worked with white Brooklyn abolitionist Lewis Tappan, Henry Ward Beecher, Our Meetings, Roland Johnson, Garrison's American Anti-Slavery Society, and many others. We are learning of Napoleon's achievements from the Record of Fugitives, a newly rediscovered Underground Railroad document. His story needs a home. The Kroger brothers, Black men who lived on Brooklyn's Pearl Street, birthed the anti-slavery movement in Brooklyn. Peter was a Presbyterian minister, founder of Brooklyn's AME Church, and ran an African day and evening school. Benjamin founded a mutual aid society, the Brooklyn African Woolman Society, named for the early anti-slavery Quaker, John Woolman. Their story needs a home. Harriet Jacobs was a frightened fugitive who reunited with her family on Myrtle Avenue, went on to write a major anti-slavery memoir, and became the agent for Brooklyn and New York Quakers in the South, helping newly emancipated people. Her story needs a home. In our Quaker research, we spent a year with detailed primary sources, and other than two major confirmations, we can say unequivocally that some of our members were likely to have participated in the Underground Railroad. Punishment for helping a runaway in the 1850s was prison time and the modern equivalent of a $31,000 fine. So understandably, the records are at times cryptic. It's sort of like connecting the dots. You may never be able to absolutely prove that 227 was an Underground Railroad stop, but that may not be the point. It is the documented home of two prominent Black abolitionists who worked together with William Lloyd Garrison and others in the cause of freedom. It can also be a repository of scholarship, goodwill, and a source of reparation, repairing history that was taken away from Black people. But how many people who need to experience this the most are likely to go into the airless basement of a luxury high-rise? Instead, restoring this 19th century Greek Revival building to its former beauty can create a jewel of a space, a cultural center where history is real and accessible, where people feel within the walls and within their bones, healing, learning, and pride. Thank you all so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Todd Fine, who will be followed by Lucy Coteen and then Julie M. Finch. So Todd Fine, yes, you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Yes, you can hear me. Okay. Yes, my name is Todd Fine. I'm the president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group, and I'm also speaking on behalf of the Friends of the Lower West Side. We are organizations that promote preservation in the Lower West Side of Manhattan, specifically the Little Syria neighborhood. And we speak in strong support of this act to designate 227 Duffield as a landmark. And the main point that we want to emphasize is that the context of the neighborhood is important. This neighborhood has suffered massive demolitions, and already pre-Civil War residential buildings were demolished to convert to commercial buildings before. So this is one of the very few pre-Civil War residential buildings in this neighborhood. And we think that the LPC needs to think about this issue of context and architectural class in designating landmarks in particular neighborhood. It cannot only be about architectural merit. Now, speaking for myself as the Washington Street Advocacy Group, I would also like to commend the LPC for reconsidering some of its approach to cultural landmarks. And I think this Duffield episode is very important in considering things that are happening citywide. In downtown Brooklyn, you have a massive demolition as part of a rezoning where the LPC did not take an affirmative measure beforehand to survey the area. And as a result, many important buildings were potentially demolished. And here, community groups are having to fight defensively for 2 decades, even though they have the support of their council member, the community board, the massive experts, and huge numbers of the community. And yet it's still this defensive 2-decade struggle. And this moment needs to be the moment where the LPC recalibrates how it responds to community-driven and expert-driven support for community landmarks. And Little Syria is another important case that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to try again with Christabel Goss. Oh, Christabel, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, wonderful. Yes. I'm so sorry to have been a problem. Okay. This is Christabel Goff speaking for the Society for the Architecture of the City. In 1976, Leonard Bernstein wrote a song about another, more famous historic house with the lyric, "Take care of this house, keep it from harm." And that is what our plea is to do, for you to do today. Since the year 2003, our group has been submitting materials advocating designation of the Truesdell House at 227 Duffield Street. That is still standing is a tribute to the intervention of many elected and appointed officials and the courts, and you have heard from many of them today, but it started with a young defender from Brooklyn Legal Services who represented Joy Chattel to save her historic house from a governmental taking under the downtown Brooklyn plan. That defender was Jennifer Levy, who today is First Deputy Attorney General, and the Attorney General herself, Letitia James, you heard from earlier. Now, 17 years later, historic preservation policy has evolved in a way that is actually circular, because from the first, the landmarks law gave jurisdiction over structures with, quote, a special aesthetic or historic value. But for some time, the aesthetic crowded out the historic. Today, we're very happy to say historic value is back. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote that his life changed in 1906 when he made a barefoot pilgrimage at dawn to the actual scene of John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry, along with other activists. He wrote, "After that pilgrimage, the fat was in the fire. My career as a scientist was swallowed up by my role as a propagandist. There is an unbroken chain of connection from that early popular American abolition movement that the Truesdells personify to the modern civil rights movement, and today to the Black Lives Matter crusade. Seeing a place, a real house where it started, brings the reality home as nothing else can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christabel. Next, Lucy Coteen. I'm bringing you in as a panelist to be followed by Julie Finch.
Start video.
Great.
Hello?
Lucy, if you could just state your name. Yeah, just state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Lucy Coteen. Am I on picture? I don't see myself.
Yes, we see you.
Okay. Hi. Thank you to the commissioners and also to all the people out there with their wonderful testimonies. I'm going to read my testimony. New York City played a major role in the horrific institution of slavery. Slavery was legal in New York State until 1827, but continued after that. There are few markers in New York City that tell of the shameful participation and profiteering off of slavery in New York. Those people who worked to help slaves escape the inhumane conditions were extraordinarily brave and took great risks to do so. There's little attention given to the abolitionist movement, and none of it is taught in school. There has been no reckoning in New York City for the important role it played in perpetuating and profiting from slavery. To eradicate the house at 227 Duffield Street is to continue to deny the role of abolitionists in New York City. The history of Harriet and Thomas Truesdell and the abolitionist movement that surrounds the area has been well documented, but that history does not stop because a particular date has gone by. With her ownership of 227 Duffield Street, Mama Joy continued the tradition of the Truesdells in making her home a political and cultural center, as well as a refuge for anyone seeking comfort and shelter. She represented the spirit of the Truesdell in her home. Mama Joy joined in with political movements to stop eminent domain, commonly referred to as Negro removal. She fought eminent domain to save her own home and later for other people's homes, joining in the community battle against the Atlantic Yards Project, which made generous use of eminent domain. She was known for her big heart and her impatience with BS. With all the attention being given to the still pervasive harm experienced by Black people in this country, why would the city not do everything in its ability to honor and protect the memory of a location where the brave of New York City risked their lives and reputations to help free enslaved people? Now, as the country examines the symbolism of the monuments that have been chosen to represent our history, preserving this humble building can serve as a monument that all can be proud of and see it as an opportunity to teach the history of those who worked to counteract the abomination that was slavery. What prevents the decision to landmark this building? If it is not landmarked, then it will be torn down so that one more monument to the rich can be built in a city that is swimming in development that has already displaced so many Black and brown people. Can this body exhibit the courage that the abolitionists showed by preserving a moment of that history? Let 227 Duffield Street be a monument to that movement. That's the end of my testimony. And I just wanted to thank Raul for his postscript about the developer not reaching out to the activists. I think that's an important thing to note. Perhaps there are others who have more information on that. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Next is Julie Finch. And Julie will be followed by Dan Perlman and then Beverly Bayless. So Julie, just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Hi. Hi,
Hi, we can hear you and see you. Yep, please just state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I am Julie M. Finch, and I'm co-chair of Friends of the Gibbons Underground Railroad Site and the Lamartine Place Historic District. This house, 227 Duffield Street, must remain standing. It is one of the known and last remnants of the community of abolitionists remaining on Abolition Place and in Brooklyn. It must be landmarked. During the draft riots of 1863, when our Quaker abolitionists, the Gibbons of West 29th Street in Manhattan, survived the burning of their home by mobs, many Black men were lynched. Many people fled Manhattan to arrive in Brooklyn, in this neighborhood and in Weeksville. In this neighborhood, a walk from Duffield Street to the landmarked Underground Railroad Old Bridge Street Church, where runaway slaves slept in the basement, is only 3.5 blocks away. The landmarked Underground Railroad Church, Plymouth, is nearby. Abolitionist Theodore Tilton spoke with abolitionist author William Wells Brown, as well as Douglas and Tubman at the Emancipation Proclamation celebration in 1863. Landmarks like the Lewis H. Latimer House are possible as well. My own family held 20 enslaved people in 1820 in Pittsboro, North Carolina, and I am a Quaker, a member of 15th Street Friends Meeting in Manhattan. As a memorial to Sandra Bland and George Floyd, preserve and landmark this 227 Duffield Street. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Dan Perlman. And I want to remind everybody, I'm working through a list of people that signed up in advance, but if you do still want to speak, please raise your hand. And Daniel Perlman will be followed by Beverly Bayless and then Alan Singer. Dan Perlman, you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Hi.
Hi, we can hear you. Please just say,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, hi. I'm a New York City native, and I learned about 227 Duffield from Equality for Flatbush, so I want to thank them. And I want to thank Lincoln and Trisha and Imani and Raoul and all them for their testimony. It was really insightful to listen to. I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in New York City. My father did, and his father, and I did not know about 227 Duffield. And so I just want to speak to Lucy's points that abolitionist history is not taught in schools. I never learned about it, and I went to some of the top schools. You know, there's an ignorance there. And I just think we should take every chance we get to preserve abolitionist landmarks, and we should do everything we can to make our kids aware of that history, which is African-American history and Brooklyn history and New York City history. And that's really all I want to say. And thank you everyone for your testimony. It's been really good to listen to. So thank you guys.
Okay, thank you. Beverly Bayless. And Beverly, you just need to unmute yourself and then turn on your camera if you choose.
Hi, thank you. My name is Beverly Bayless, and I'm a resident of downtown Brooklyn. I've been a resident of Fort Greene in downtown Brooklyn for 20 years. I'm in favor of granting 227 Duffield individual landmark protection status to honor this building's historical importance as a stop on the Underground Railroad and as the last abolitionist home left on Abolitionist Place. When I first moved to the neighborhood, I immediately heard about Walt Whitman's residence in nearby Clinton Hill and about other historical figures like General Greene from the Revolutionary War, after whom the neighborhood Fort Greene and Fort Greene Park are named. I did not hear about Thomas and Harriet Truesdale, who used the building at 227 Duffield for abolitionist activity, nor about the Bridge Street Church and its role in hiding runaway slaves. It was only relatively recently that I learned any of this history that had been passed down from generation to generation in the Black community here. Given this history, not only should 227 Duffield not be demolished, but it should be landmarked and preserved to raise historical and cultural awareness. This current moment provides us an opportunity to define who we are as people in America and as Brooklynites. Providing individual landmark status to 227 Duffield will help us and future generations remember the painful history of slavery. It will also help preserve the memory of abolitionists such as Thomas and Harriet Truesdale and other Brooklyn abolitionists, including William Harnett, August Storrs, and others who should be honored and held up as examples of Americans who stood up bravely to fight racism and degradation and who fought for the basic human rights of others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next we have Alan Singer. And Alan, I'm promoting you to a panelist. And Alan will be followed by Kelly Britt and then Cheryl Laroche.
Okay, am I in?
Yes, you are. If you could just state your name for the record, you have 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Alan Singer. I'm a resident of Brooklyn, a former New York City high school teacher, an historian and teacher educator at Hofstra University. The author of 2 books on New York's complex relationship with slavery, both published by SUNY Press. I'm here to speak in favor of landmark status and the preservation of 227 Duffield Street. During the 17th century, enslaved Africans built the infrastructure of the nascent city. During the 18th and 19th century, New York City and the independent city of Brooklyn profited from the transatlantic slave trade and the sale of slave-produced commodities. One of the world's mega sugar refineries was located in Williamsburg. When founded, it was known as Havemeyer's Sugar. It later was renamed Domino. The sugar trade, which included smuggling enslaved Africans into Cuba in violation of international law, was financed by a predecessor bank of Citibank. Even after slavery was banned in New York State in 1827, New York City remained closely tied to slavery and the sale of slave-produced commodities. In 1861, the mayor of New York City, Fernando Wood, called for the city to secede from the United States along with the South. During the Civil War, Brooklyn's Democratic Party opposed both the war effort and the 13th Amendment ending slavery in the United States. However, the city of Brooklyn was also a major Underground Railroad safe haven for freedom seekers and home to leading abolitionists. Black abolitionists included James Pennington, who escaped from slavery in Maryland at the age of 19, became a minister, author, and abolitionist. Willis Hodges, who lived in Williamsburg, published an abolitionist newspaper. Elizabeth and James Gloucester fought slavery as part of the Shiloh Presbyterian Church, where James was minister. The Gloucesters were also friends and financial supporters of John Brown, who hosted him before the ill-fated attack on Harper's Ferry. None of those buildings have survived. Brooklyn's white abolitionists included Lewis Tappan, who helped free the Amistad captives, Henry Ward Beecher, pastor of Plymouth Congregational Church, whose basement is a documented home for freedom seekers, and Harriet and Thomas Truesdale. Many of the structures from that era have been torn down. 227 Duffield is one of the remaining historic structures that celebrates Brooklyn's connection to the abolitionist movement in a campaign to end slavery. While evidence is not conclusive whether 227 Duffield was an Underground Railroad site, its connection to the abolitionist movement is undisputed. At a time when Black Lives Matter movement is forcing a re-evaluation of American history, 227 Duffield must be preserved. As the former home of prominent abolitionists, is the ideal location for a museum to tell the complex story about the relationship between New York, Brooklyn, American slavery, and the battle to end that evil institution. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'm going to bring in Councilmember Stephen Levin. And Councilmember, you just have to, great, you've unmuted yourself.
Okay. So I just wanted to, I know that Elizabeth Adams, my legislative director, delivered testimony on my behalf, but I also wanted to just very briefly add my voice in support of this landmarking. Going back now, probably 8 years or so, I met with the late Mama Joy Chattel and Ro Rothblatt about preserving a number of the homes on Abolitionist Place. 227 Duffield is the final remaining standing structure, and as everyone that's testified before has said, this is very much a part. The structure here and the story of abolitionism in New York and in Brooklyn is an important part of our history that we need to lift up. And the gentleman that testified just before me, laid out very clearly the role that slavery had in building New York City, and the exploitation of the unpaid labor, uncompensated labor of untold millions of Americans, Black Americans, should not be erased. And we have it, and especially at this moment in our country's history, an obligation to face up to that history and confront it, and also lift up the history of those New Yorkers that did stand up to it in their own time, and this is an important way to do that. And so I want to thank the commission. I want to thank the mayor's office, in particular, Tahira Moore, for her work on this, and I want to add my voice in support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, council member. Next, we're going to have Kelly Britt. Okay, Kelly Britt. Just need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for having me here today and for this hearing. For the record, my name is Kelly Britt. I'm a historical urban archaeologist from Brooklyn College, and I am here on my behalf. I just want to echo some of the testimony that's already been stated here today. To preserve this important home and site. This is a site of unique and important abolitionist history, particularly during this momentous time of Black Lives Matter. As a historical urban archaeologist who has worked on other Underground Railroad sites in smaller urban spaces, I can testify that places like this that have been denounced that they need to be demolished can actually be saved, restored, and brought to the community to interpret this really important past and serve as a pillar of heritage to a community. So I'd like to also echo what has also been stated, that documenting Underground Railroad history materially through either the built environment or through archaeological evidence is difficult due to the clandestine nature of Underground Railroad activity, but that does not diminish the intangible history that a place such as 227 Duffield embodies. Being the last standing structure of Abolitionist Place, it serves as an important place of heritage for the present community. And I feel it's an imperative to landmark. As history unfolds, more information that this house holds may be unveiled to the present community. And this community has been very vocal from the get-go as to its importance to the heritage that it stands for. And I think that voice needs to be heard and actually addressed. So I highly support that this be landmarked as an important space for Black heritage, for abolitionist heritage, and just for heritage to this community. And thank you again for this time to be able to testify and having this hearing.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Cheryl Laroche. And she will be followed by Liza Croce. And Cheryl, let's see, I promoted you to panelist. You need to accept that. Cheryl. Okay, I think we might have lost her. Cheryl, if you can rejoin, I don't see you at all anymore. If you could rejoin, I will call you again. But let's move to Liza Croce. Liza, I've promoted you to a panelist. And Liza, you just need to accept being promoted. Okay, Liza Croce, you need to accept being promoted.
And Cheryl Laroche is here.
Okay. Oh, okay. Cheryl, let's start with you and then followed by Liza.
Thank you so much. Let's see if I can get my camera going here. I want to really thank you and thank the Landmark Commission for having this hearing, and thank you for allowing me to testify. I am an associate research professor in historic preservation at the University of Maryland, College Park, although today I'm here as a resident and a native New Yorker. Let's see, I think I can get this done now. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay.
And we can
All
hear
right,
you.
thank you. I served as the archaeological conservator for the African burial ground, and I witnessed the city attempt to destroy what has turned out to be one of the major historical resources of the 20th century. And from that work, slavery became a touchstone in New York and a discussion point that would have never arisen without the survival of that site. The community had to come forward and fight in ways that were extraordinary. 227 Abolitionist Place has the ability to do the same thing for abolitionism and for studying of the Underground Railroad and escape from slavery in Brooklyn. You have received, I believe, ample testimony in favor of preserving the site and landmarking it. If you were to compile all the testimony that you've received thus far, you would be able to clearly amplify what you've already done. So that I don't want to add a lot of historical fact because I believe you have more than enough. One of the things that I want to say is that I've written a book called Free Black Communities in the Underground Railroad, The Geography of Resistance. And I spend my time around the country standing on parking lots and looking at plaques because that's all that's left of our history. And when you look at the monumentality of the Confederate monuments that have been put up there 60 feet tall, they're enormous to stamp that ideology on the psyche of the American public. And these little plaques don't have the same effect. We have an opportunity here to save a building that will bring forward not only the history of abolitionism and escape from slavery, but place 227 inside what I do call the geography of resistance. It's clear from looking at all of the historical research that 227 resides within an historical context that is also very important to preserve and to understand. By landmarking this site, you afford one of the most precious resources, and that is time. The study of Black history, the study to incorporate Blacks in the Underground Railroad takes much more time than what is normally facilitated for this kind of work. You don't often have the ability to go through and talk about these things in the ways in which they are required in order to make the case. And so what I want to say is that you have and are taking the opportunity to come forward and save one of the more important sites, historical sites in Brooklyn that's still standing. And that when I call this one of the most exciting places about studying the Underground Railroad, It was because it has every single aspect and component that I expect to see when I'm out in the field looking at these sites. I will close by saying this. I've spent the last 20 years tracking a man named William Paul Quinn across the country. He established Underground Railroad churches for the AME Church everywhere he went. It was astonishing to me when I got to the Bridge Street history, and Paul Quinn was one of the founders of that church. You have within your purview the ability to lay out a context for research on the Underground Railroad that is unprecedented. And I urge you not only to landmark this building, but to preserve it and to maintain the history, the integrity. And if a museum comes forward, that would be the ideal place to have this conversation and help New York stop ignoring its most precious aspect. And that's its history, and primarily its Black history. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Liza Prost, we've already brought you in, so you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Okay, let's see.
And then just please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes. And Liza will be followed. I'm going to try again with Daniel Mccullough and then Jacob Morris.
Okay, can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Liza Pross, for the record, and I'm a resident of downtown Brooklyn. I'd like to offer testimony to the cultural and social significance of 227 Duffield Street. And this is my experience with a community project which centered on 227 Duffield. In 2016, as a CUNY graduate student enrolled in a class entitled Community Acts, my classmate and I embarked on a community project focusing on 227 Duffield Street, its anti-slavery history, and the story of its previous owner, Miss Joy Chattel. Inspired by the activism of Joy Chattel, we created a celebration of joy. Collaborating with Joy Chattel's daughter, Shanae Lee, longtime community activist Raoul Rothblatt, and historian James Driscoll, we organized a simple celebration to honor Ms. Chattel's efforts to both save her home and share with the public the African-American history that lives within 227 Duffield Street. A hidden history that includes being a stop on the Underground Railroad. The Truesdells and Miss Joy Chattel tie 227 Duffield Street to the rich abolitionist history of Brooklyn, and both deserve recognition. There is cultural significance to this one remaining home on the block, a home that beckons others to learn of its abolitionist history, a history that's been buried and that some seek to obliterate. Scholar activist Judith F. Baca writes in La Memoria de Nuestra Tierra, Sites of Public Memory, that land has memory. On a rainy evening in November 2016, participants gathered at the top of Bridge Street Church to hear Shanae speak about her mother's fight to save 227 Duffield Street in hopes of creating an African-American Heritage Center and museum to acknowledge and honor some of the lost Black history of Brooklyn. Raoul Rothblatt's daughter gifted us a song on her violin as we all descended down the stairs, lanterns in hand, a procession of people making our way to 227 Abolitionist Place. We walked above and through the memories of that space, of that land. We were potentially walking above tunnels that were part of the Underground Railroad. Can you imagine the history we were steeped in as we traveled down the street? Can you believe it's unknown to many, hiding in plain sight? Or are you not surprised about this omission of this painful part of our country's history? There's an opportunity before you to make this necessary history available to a much wider audience. Perhaps it's a brave ask, and undoubtedly even braver for you to answer with a yes. Will you award 227 Duffield Street landmark status? Will you pivot into this unprecedented moment with the acknowledgement and support of 227 Duffield as a standing living symbol of Brooklyn's African-American history, this country's history? Will you be part of the beginning stages of repairing our country? Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Next, Daniel Mccullough, followed by Jacob Morris, and then we'll go to other people that have their hands raised. I'd ask everybody to please stick to 3 minutes. Daniel Mccullough, need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Daniel Mccullough, president of the Four-Borough Neighborhood Preservation Alliance Corporation. I testify to humbly request the LPC landmark 227 Duffield Street. It's been over 15 years since the city attempted to take the properties of Joy Chattel and Louis Greenstein, which were proposed Underground Railroad sites. I testified back at the city council in 2014, making an urgent plea to preserve Black history. I was kind of troubled by the developers' argument that they would lose money. If I remember, the landmarks law does allow for landmark properties to sell air rights. So I'm not sure if this was ever pursued by the developer, property owners. I know the Bloomberg administration had said they wanted this for a parking lot, that the property, they basically lied to the council about this being historical sites. It took Jennifer Levy's lawsuit, the efforts of so many preservationists from Christopher Gulch, Jake Morris, so many people, Rothblatt, all these individuals, which I lose my memory too easily. Also, the previous LPC commissioner in a meeting with my organization basically made the argument that LPC doesn't just have power over the front of the home. You can now basically extend the landmarks law into backyards, because there have been so many extensions approved in the Fort Greene Historic District. And former Chairman Tierney basically said that Mayor Bloomberg opposed landmarking 227 Duffield Street. It didn't really have a historical basis on why they didn't want to landmark this. And because, they said eminent domain, the property's blighted because it's not built up to 60% of the zoning district. But if you upzone the district, of course it's going to be blighted, because a 12.5 means you have to have a skyscraper or something. So, I would like to see the LPC landmark the property, and if the developer is under such a financial constraint, let's take a look at the air rights law, if it still exists or can be decided upon this.
Mr. Mccullough, your 3 minutes are up. Could you please wrap up?
So, it's been almost 18 years. I would appreciate seeing this property landmark, because that's how long I've been working on this, along with almost everybody who's testified here today. I thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Jacob Morris. And Jacob, I see you're here twice. I'm going to just try and bring you in both times. I've promoted you to a panelist, and if you could just unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, and please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
And how's my video? Can you see me?
Your video is not turned on.
Oh, let's see, video settings. Oh, hey, it worked. This is great. Okay, let's see. My name's Jacob Morris. I'm the director of the Harlem Historical Society. And in the year 2006, Mama Joy, well, I had just written the Underground Railroad grant. for the New York Historical Society's Slavery in New York exhibit. That was the first federal grant that the New York Historical Society ever won. If you recall, New York City and a lot of the country was shocked about the that New York City and New York State had a huge population of slaves, and that slavery was a big part of New York City's history. I brought to Dr. Mira, the president of the Historical Society, the idea that, well, they needed money for the exhibit, and that here was this federal money from the U.S. Department of Education to disseminate knowledge about the Underground Railroad in the United States. And I said, here we could tell the story of the flip side of slavery, which is abolitionism and the Underground Railroad movement. We won. Joy and I had been friends for many years prior to that, and she asked me to help save the house. And I came up with the idea of naming Duffield Street Abolitionist Place. The key to this situation is that resistance to slavery is reason enough to preserve. Resistance to slavery is reason enough to preserve. At the time, it was you had to be, they wanted you to prove that this was a location on the Underground Railroad. I told everybody on the block and all the other activists involved, I said, that's their game. We're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar real estate steamroller, the extension of Metrotech. And if they found a skeleton in the basement with iron manacles around the bones, they would say that's not definitive proof of Underground Railroad activity and of a black escaping from slavery. But again, resistance to slavery is reason enough to preserve. That's the abolitionist movement. It's incontrovertible of the major and prominent role the Truesdales had in the abolitionist movement. Everything else is secondary. Now, what I recommend is that in your landmarking designation, and I applaud the staff, your excellent staff, in their work and coming to the conclusion that this should be landmarked. That the house be restored, that the Truesdale house be restored to its original condition prior to the Civil War. If you're going to preserve it, you want to bring the history to life, and that's exactly what we want to do. And this is incredibly culturally and historically significant. And that's the objective of preserving history through architecture. Restore the house.
Mr. Morris, I'm sorry, you're well past your 3 minutes. Could you please wrap it up?
Okay. So please restore the house. And if you can recommend that it come under the jurisdiction of the existing initiative of the Brooklyn Historical Society's Pursuit of Freedom program, which was funded going back all the way to 2007, 2008 by the Bloomberg administration. And I believe they merged now with the Brooklyn Public Library System. Now that would get us to where we really want to go, which is to have this preserved and promulgated as a site that all of Brooklyn and New York City can be proud of, and that we can.
Sorry, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but thank you, Mr. Morris, for your testimony. We have, let's see, we have more people signed in to speak with their hands raised. I'm going to just call you in the order of your hands being raised. And we're going to start with Zulma, Lena, Zen, and then followed by Rachel and Annette. So Zolmalina, bringing you in as panelist. So let's see, Zolmalina, you just need to accept being brought in. And then if you could just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Hello.
Hi, please just state your name for the record and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, my name is Zumalina Den. I'm here representing Preserving East New York. So we are here in support of the designation of 227 Duffield Street because Black landmarks matter. We have already lost far too many historic treasures that speak about Black history. It is about time that action is being taken to ensure that this building is protected and preserved from the injustices that many of the Black landmarks and Black communities have suffered. The building stands currently engulfed by the speculative construction of high-rise hotels, office spaces, and luxury apartments that have plagued downtown Brooklyn, causing displacement of our Black and brown people, destroying their homes, businesses, institutions, and erasing with it history. Renaming Duffield Street to Abolitionist Place is not enough. Installing a plaque is not enough. 227 Duffield Street's physical presence must remain in place preserved for years to come. Otherwise, what sense does it make to stand in the middle of Abolitionist Place? I have a plaque in the middle of everything that stands for gentrification. Experiencing history through books is not the same as experiencing history through place. There is power in being able to visit the last remaining place in Brooklyn connected to the pursuit of freedom. We thank the Landmarks Preservation Commission for taking this major step of moving, We thank the Landmarks Preservation Commission for taking this major step of moving this building into the process of designation during such a pivotal time. There is no better time than now for the designation of this building when in today's social climate, we're fighting to dismantle structural racism. Landmarking 227 Duffield Street is a symbol of the moment and one that stands for the change we want to see. It's time for New York City to invest in protecting Black spaces and infrastructure in our communities that have struggled to receive protection. New York Landmarks Preservation Commission, let's do this and continue doing this work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, Rachel and Annette, followed by Karen Carbiner. So Rachel and Annette, I'm bringing you in. Okay, please just unmute yourself.
Hello, testing. Are we coming in clear?
Yes, yes, you are. Please state your name for the record, and then you have 3 minutes.
Yes. My name is Rachael Collins. I am a lifelong Brooklynite in favor of the landmark designation of 227 Duffield. It is so very rare to find a tangible and more so local connection to your ancestors as an African-American descendant of an enslaved person. My ancestors were some of those forced to immigrate to this country for forced labor and subsequently had their history rewritten in order to highlight the purported heroism and forward thinking of their community. As a result, some can spend a lifetime trying to connect the genetic dots to no avail. Much is left to speculation and myth-like tales. 227 Duffield is that tangible connection, a connection we deserve to have preserved, a connection my great-grandmother who came north to New York City in the early 20th century to start a business, and my mother and grandmother who arrived here during the Great Migration would have been so proud to see. African-American Harvard history professor and historian Dr. Henry Louis Gates said, The way to begin to establish a firm foundation is to find out on whose shoulders you're standing. This is what the preservation of 227 Duffield's physical building is all about. In the words of Isabel Wilkerson, so many of our people did not dream the American dream, but willed it into being by a definition of their choosing. And much of that dream began with the Underground Railroad. These are our stories, but they are also America's stories, and they are not being told accurately enough or perhaps at all in schools. Little Black kids should not only have their own research or biased school books or an elder's memory to rely on for accurate accounts of the past, like I did. Help us to have the same historical honor as others who made the choice to immigrate to this country and choose to landmark 227 Duffield Street. Thank you. You can state your name.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
my name is Annette Collins, the proud mother of Rachael Collins. My remembrance of everything is as a teenager, I was proud to work in my grandmother's beauty salon, and that was in the late 50s. I didn't realize then that the preservation of our history was so important. And to understand your past, you have to understand your future. And 227 Duffield should be saved because so much of our African-American history has been stripped away. It feels as though these decision makers who would rather we cease to be instead of saving the house, such a tangible historical point of significance for us. It shouldn't be such a difficult decision or so easily erased by handing it over to someone who does not share our experiences, least of all the developers. An author, Bakari Sellers' book, I'm quoting him, the name of his book is My Vanishing Country. And he says his father's traumatic historical experiences should not have been his in 2020, but many of them are, and I feel the same way. You all, please save the house. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for your testimony. Next, we're going to have Karen Carbiner, followed by Latanya Kramer. So Karen, I'm bringing you in.
All right. Thank you very
Great.
much. I think that's working. Yes, thank you so much to the Landmarks Preservation Commission for this opportunity to support cultural landmarking in New York City, particularly the hotbed of 19th century anti-slavery activity at 227 Duffield Street. And I also want to thank my fellow presenters. I feel like I'm in very good company. It's been very informative and very interesting. My name is Karen Carbiner, and I speak on behalf of the Walt Whitman Initiative, which is a New York-based nonprofit organization that has been working to preserve and protect another cultural landmark, 99 Ryerson Street in Brooklyn, home to the poet Walt Whitman as he completed the first edition of America's Cultural Declaration of Independence, Leaves of Grass. Like 99 Ryerson, 227 Duffield isn't a pretty building, and it hasn't enjoyed a life of ease and care. Both are street smart survivors from the 1850s that have changed with the times and with their neighborhoods. Both have truly extraordinary things happen within them. Both are living archives demonstrating the Brooklyn beginnings of globally significant events. I teach at NYU, where professors, including myself, often proudly claim the city as classroom. We are not alone. New York City's Department of Education website greets prospective teachers with the question, what does having the city as your classroom mean for new teachers? Well, whether we're just out of school or have been teaching for decades, it means opening doors and minds and exploring new places and ideas while utilizing resources only available here. And in the classroom known as New York City, 227 Duffield and 99 Ryerson are two of its most important lessons. Sharing a block in downtown Brooklyn with giant retailers such as Old Navy and the 25-story Sheraton Brooklyn, The little building at 227 Duffield has a big story to tell. While much of antebellum New York City steered away from abolitionism because of business interests, while Abraham Lincoln felt notable tension as he stopped here on the way to his inauguration in 1861, 227 Duffield protected Harriet and Thomas Truesdale as they organized anti-slavery activity, likely using their residence as a stop on the Underground Railroad. Likewise, 99 Ryerson, also situated among a growing number of larger modern structures, teaches its pilgrims that American poetry was born on a working class street in Brooklyn, and that greatness can indeed begin anywhere. It's one thing to read about history in a book and another to experience it, to feel the energy, the energy of a place in which great things happen, and to be inspired to future greatness by its living example. As you contemplate its designation, please consider the inestimable value of 227 Duffield and other cultural landmarks as teaching tools for New Yorkers and for the world. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Next we have Natanya Kramer, followed by Martha C. So Natanya, bringing you in. Please just unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Natanya Kramer. I'm the Director of Service Learning and Civic Engagement at Brooklyn Friends School. I want to thank the Landmark Preservation Commission for considering 227 Duffield Street at this hearing today, and just express my tremendous gratitude to the many organizers and activists who have advocated so powerfully for this moment, including the Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network, Fury, Equality for Flatbush, the local legislators, local Quakers. I echo the testimony shared by so many already this morning and strongly support designating 227 Duffield Street as a landmark. I just want to briefly add my voice this morning as an educator and school leader who works at one of the many schools that is located just blocks away from Abolitionist Place. My students and colleagues have submitted written testimony, and I'm speaking on behalf of our school community now. As a Quaker school committed to justice and equity, now in our 152nd year, the landmarking of 227 Duffield Street will have tremendous significance for our students and our school community, as well as the school communities in downtown Brooklyn and throughout New York City. As Karen just shared before me, the city is our classroom. 227 Duffield Street is a part of our curriculum. The history and legacy of this important site is integrated into the first day of high school orientation for every one of our 9th graders, and is a meaningful part of student learning in our Solidarity and Justice course. Our students, our families, our colleagues have participated in social justice tours of the downtown Brooklyn neighborhood surrounding Brooklyn Friends School, and learned from our community partners of the efforts to save 227 Duffield Street, the last abolitionist home left on Abolitionist Place. Brooklyn Friends School students and families wrote letters to Mayor Bill de Blasio and First Lady McCray to advocate for preservation of 227 Duffield Street. And we are tremendously grateful that this hearing is taking place today. Our school community is united in support of honoring the importance of the abolitionist legacy to our children and our community. We believe that landmarking 227 Duffield Street will serve as an important response to the critical need for us to collectively act on behalf of humanity, equity, and belonging. I just want to reiterate that our young people are watching, they care, and they are counting on us to honor, landmark, and preserve 227 Duffield Street. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Martha C., followed by Simeon Bankoff. Martha, you just need to unmute yourself.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please just state your name for the record.
Yes, my name is Martha C. I'm a bookkeeper and a theater historian and a Brooklyn resident of the Fort Greene area for over 60 years. The story of Joy Chattel, Mama Joy Chattel, is not alone. It reminds me of August Wilson's Radio Golf. And Mama Chatel's house is Aunt Esther's house in August Wilson's play. I'm a native New Yorker. My mom and grandma were born in Farmingdale, Long Island. And at one time, my family lived at 208 Duffield Street after having the family property eminently domained to build the Long Island Railroad. Mama Joy's voice still resonates in my ear. She once said, "Can't we have anything?" For far too many years and far too many times, this house has come close to being demolished. I appreciate all the history that is being made here today. But if today's hearing only amounts to more beautiful and compassionate words, then we will go down as another wicked twist in history. All future generations will have to pay for another justice denied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next we have Simeon Bankoff, followed by Deborah Abel. Simeon, you just need to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Simeon Bankoff, Executive Director of the Historic. Oops, you can hear me, correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council, speaking on my own behalf. HDC's officials testimony was given earlier by my colleague, Kelly Carroll. I just really, listening to this, felt I could not let this go unremarked to thank all of the people who have been working such a very, very, very long time to be able to come to this hearing. I don't believe that 17 years ago we were standing in front of that house asking the city of New York to preserve it, and it seemed like an impossibility, and here we are now. So thank you Joy, thank you Lewis, thank you Raoul, thank you Fury and the South Brooklyn Legal Services and everyone who has picked up the battalion since then, all of our elected officials, and thank you especially to the Landmarks Preservation Commission, who has shown true evolution in their thinking and are really doing the city proud by holding this hearing, and I hope and I pray designating this 227 Duffield Street as an individual New York City landmark.
Okay, thank you, Simeon. So we have two more people with their hands raised. I'm going to call somebody or allow somebody to speak last on the phone. Last three numbers of their phone number is 505.
Yes, hello.
Hi, could you just please state your name for the record and then you have 3 minutes?
Yes, thank you. My name is Henry Euler, and I'm a member of the Queens Preservation Council, longtime board member of Bayside Historical Society and the Old Town of Flushing Burial Ground Conservancy. I'm calling today to totally support the landmarking of the building at 227 Duffield Street. I have been following this story for years. I have been so impressed by the dedication by so many people, including Joy Chattel, and so many groups and so many elected officials to try to protect and preserve this important building because of its ties to the abolitionist movement prior to the Civil War. Although the building itself has been altered over the years, I believe that its link to the abolitionist movement cannot be denied. The building is an important artifact of African American culture, history, and heritage. It deserves to be landmarked based on its historical and cultural merits. Today, now more than ever, we must recognize the African American experience in our city, state, and country. I mentioned before that I'm part of the Old Town of Flushing Burial Ground Conservancy. We have been working likewise for years to make sure that that particular burial ground is preserved and protected. We've renamed it. We have worked with parks to make sure that it's taken care of. We're working with DDC to get a memorial stone placed at the site to honor those that are there. The site was scoped. There's up to 1,000 people buried there. Most of them are African American, and a large part are also Native American. And the two co-chairs, Mandingo Shaka and Robbie Garrison, and the Conservancy members have been working on this for years. We're passionate about our burial ground, just as the people in Brooklyn are passionate about 227 Duffield Street. And we're both working on these two projects to ensure that the African American experience is preserved. So I would ask the Landmarks Preservation Commission to please landmark 227 Duffield Street as a reminder of the past and the building's great importance in American history. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. The last person with their hand raised is LG Aristo 2+. And I'm bringing you in to a panelist. Just need to unmute yourself. Okay, if you want to speak, you need to unmute yourself. LG Aristo 2+.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, now, yeah, we can hear you now. If you could just state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Yes. My name is Michael Henry Adams, and I'm calling from Harlem. And I'm gratified by the outcome today, finally, after 17 years. I was there with Christabel Goff and many others all those years ago. And I was heartened further a couple of weeks ago when the mayor, de Blasio, said that beyond the police department, that systemic racism exists in every department of the city. And of course, for years, I've been saying that that's particularly true of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. Not so much because of what it does, but its sins of omission and the grave disparity between what's designated in neighborhoods like Brooklyn Heights or Park Slope or Greenwich Village compared to Harlem or East New York or the Bronx. And I hope with this designation that this is a sign that at last we are turning a corner and that in the future we will have a more responsive commission which appreciates that justice delayed is justice denied. When people first brought up this house, there were other houses related in history to 227 Duffield Street, which were extant. And that's not unlike how when the Mount Morris Park Historic District was designated many, many years ago, the commission said to the community, they said, well, you know, you say you want more and we hear you, but this is just, you know, an opening salvo, we'll be back. And they were back 47 years later. And in the interim, so much was destroyed, and it's not unlike what happened here at Duffield Street. The commission earlier said there was nothing here worthy of protecting, and in the interim, before they turned around, so much of great value was destroyed. So, of course, Black Lives Matter, of course, Black landmarks matter. They matter because, you know, Black people are not just Black people, we are Americans. We are the people who built this nation. And so our history is second to none. Harlem is an extraordinary place, which day by day is being destroyed bit by bit. And the commission really should not allow this to happen. I mean, and in some instances, as with the Hamilton Theater, we look at proposals that are being made there, and we say, well, what is the good of landmarking at all? Because there are developers talking about taking an historic theater, the only one remaining in West Harlem, and demolishing it entirely and building a tower. It's just extraordinary what is occurring. And we can't allow developers to hold the community ransom and say, oh, well, you know, if you want affordable housing, you have to give up landmarking and landmarks. We
Hey,
need,
Mr. Adams, your 3 minutes have passed. Could you please wrap up?
yes, I am wrapping up. Thank you. We need the commission to work with us and to recognize that our landmarks are significant and important too, and to look at this great disparity and to say, oh, well, we should be a part of remedying the fact that people who live in white neighborhoods have so much more than people who live in African-American neighborhoods that don't have as much money. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate your testimony. And I do not see anybody else with their hand raised, nor anybody who is signed up that we haven't called.
Great, thank you.
So I think that's it.
Thank you, Lisa. And I just want to turn to Rich for 1 minute to see if he can quickly summarize any written testimony that has actually not been reflected today.
Yes, so we've received over 70 letters in support. Many of them have been accompanied by people who have spoken today, in addition to 1 letter in opposition.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to take a moment to really thank everyone who took time today to participate and testify in this public hearing. And I also want to acknowledge all of the emails and letters and the written testimony that we've received. And I want to note that those have all been shared with our commissioners.
And Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is one person that was signed up that now has their hand raised that I'd called earlier. So could we just do one more?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you,
So
Lisa.
Anthony Beckford, sure. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Anthony Beckford, I had called you before, but now I see you with your hand raised. So we're bringing you in. So Anthony, you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you choose.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, let's see, I think my camera's facing the wrong way. Still trying to get over this. All right, there we go. All right, so thank y'all for having me on. To all the commissioners, to LPC committee members, thank you for this opportunity to testify. As you all know, my name is Anthony Beckford. I am the president and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Brooklyn. I am also one of the advocates that's fully in support of landmarking 227 Duffield. And it's for the same reasons why we're out here marching, protesting, and fighting now for the preservation of not only Black life, but also Black landmarks. Black history landmarks as is. For years, our history has been either demolished or stolen from us. For years, we have been denied the right, and our youth have been denied the right to learn true Black history. When you look at 227 Duffield, that right there is a landmark of history. The rest of the houses and homes that were near there were landmarks as well too, and they were demolished. We stand against that, not only as a community, but as a full movement. And you see what our numbers are throughout the whole of New York City with this movement. We all stand together to make sure that we preserve and save 227 Duffield. We've been out there on the front lines marching, along with many other advocates who have been, very vocal about making sure that the history is learned about 227 Duffield and about the fact that there needs to be a change in the structure of how landmarking is done as well too, moving forward. Because we don't gain the opportunity and the privilege to just say, we like this needs to stay, and it happens. We don't gain the opportunity and the privilege or even the financial backing like these developers and these real estate moguls have. But what we have is our bodies and our voices. What we have is the unity that we have come together, in this fight to preserve not only our people in our communities, but also the landmarks that show and signify and symbolize our people and our movement. Yes, we've had 5 murals done throughout New York City that myself and others have pushed the city to do, but murals are not enough. Murals cannot replace the landmarks that will teach history, the landmarks that are actual visualization that the youth can touch, that they can see and they can learn from. Imagine what would happen if schools brought their children to these landmarks like 227 Duffield and actually revealed the history that happened here in Brooklyn. We're not taught that. What we're taught is about watered down history and many lies within the history books that do not reflect the culture of our people, does not reflect the leadership that we've had and the history we've had here in New York City, but specifically in Brooklyn. So I say that we need to make this landmark immediately, no ifs, ands about it. There's no compromise to this issue at all. If we're gonna move forward, we must move forward progressively in the right way and do the right thing. And I call upon the commission to do the right thing and listen to the demand to the people to make sure that 227 Duffield is landmarked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and I just want to ask one last time if there is anyone else in the meeting who would like to speak, please raise your hand now. We want to make sure we've given everybody an opportunity to participate.
And Sarah, as we're waiting on that, I just did want to mention that the Brooklyn Borough President, Derek Adams, did send in a letter of support as well. That was not previously mentioned.
Thank you. Okay, so not seeing any hands raised. I want to, again, as I was saying, thank everyone for participating today. We've heard a lot of moving, thoughtful, and eloquent comments. And I think that the conversations today are just the beginning and really elevate important discussions that we will continue to have in all of our work going forward. So I want to thank everyone for that. Excuse me. And as we do with all designations, we will now move to close the hearing today. We're going to take away all of the comments that we heard. We're going to absorb those comments. We're also going to finalize our research work, and we will schedule a vote on the designation at a public hearing in the near future. We'll let everybody know when that is, and to give everybody ample notice. And we also welcome any written comments that you'd like to send in until that vote is scheduled. So thank you again, everyone, for participating today. And we will, I'm going to make a motion that we close the hearing. And commissioners, let's have a vote on that. So let's see, I just want to make sure everybody's unmuted. A couple of people, okay. So Commissioner Gustafson, would you second that motion to close the hearing?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Hearing is closed, but as I said, we welcome any other written letters you'd like to submit until we schedule the vote. Thank you. And we're now going to break for a lunch recess, and we will come back at 1:15. All right, thank you. So, and everyone who's in the meeting, if you're here, anyone who's in the meeting who's here for an item that we'll be doing after lunch, just please exit the meeting now and rejoin the meeting at 1:15, and we'll let you back in. We'll be doing our preservation department agenda this afternoon. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. I can't get out of this.